Hello, and welcome to this edition of Wisdom of the Fathers. The Catholic faith is one of rich intellectual tradition, stretching all the way back to the time of Christ. When Christ ascended into heaven, he left us a church that was in its infancy, in its self-understanding. This infancy created a need within the church for individuals to rise up and think about, pray over, and meditate upon what God was revealing. The answer to this need was the church fathers, certain individuals who were intellectual giants, gifted with the ability to either break down an article of faith into its simplest form or develop it further. They did this so we ordinary Catholics could understand the fullness of Jesus' teaching. In this 13th and final episode, we're going to talk about St. Ambrose of Milan, a well-respected church father. St. Ambrose of Milan was a bishop, a philosopher, a theologian, a religious leader, a teacher, a catechumen, a trained lawyer, and a writer. He was one of the most famous fathers and doctors of the church, chosen together with St. Augustine, St. John Chrysostom, and St. Athanasius to uphold the chair of the Prince of the Apostles in the tribune of St. Peter's in Rome. In terms of his personality, he was a bold administrator, bishop, and statesman whose writings are the only mature expression of his official life and labors. In other words, he's a go-getter. St. Ambrose held to the Nicene Creed, and through his arguments he persuaded Emperor Gratian to embrace the Nicene Confession. In addition, he influenced the conversion of St. Augustine. He was known to impose the Orthodox on the early Christian church and combated the imperial court's bias toward the Arians, the old religion, and the Jews. In particular, St. Ambrose opposed the many advances of the Emperor Valentinian, who supported the Arians. In his defense of the Orthodox position, he was often compared to St. Hilary of Poitiers. St. Ambrose was well versed in a number of topics. It should be pointed out that most of his writings are homilies, spoken commentaries on the Old and New Testaments, taken down by his hearers and afterwards reduced to their present form. In his writings, he talked about the divinity of Christ, the Holy Ghost, and the Christian sacraments. The most influential of his moral discourse is the work on the duties of Christian ecclesiastics. It is essentially a manual of Christian morality. His works are so highly esteemed that popes, councils, and theologians have frequently referenced them. Even in his own time, it was felt that few could speak so clearly on the true sense of the scriptures and the teachings of the church. He was the first to formulate ideas about church-state relations, which would one day become the prevalent medieval Christian viewpoint. In 340 A.D., St. Ambrose was born into a Roman Christian family and was raised in Trier, where he was well acquainted with many members of the clergy. His father was Aurelius Ambrosius, the Praetorian prefect of Gaul. His mother was a woman of intellect and piety. Ambrose had two siblings who are venerated as saints. One of his sisters was a nun. After the death of his father, St. Ambrose was educated in Rome and studied literature, law, and rhetoric. In circa 372, he was made governor of Liguria and Emilia, with headquarters in Milan, which was then the second capital city in Italy. He continued as governor until 374, when he became the Bishop of Milan. He was 34 when he was elected bishop, even though he was not yet baptized. As bishop, he immediately adopted an ascetic lifestyle, gave his money to the poor, donated all of his land, leaving only a small portion for his sister, and committed the care of his family to his brother. During his time as bishop, he fought to stop heretical ideas from infecting his flock in Milan, such as Arianism and paganism. In one instance, he stood against the Arians at the Synod of Aquileia and refused to turn over a church in Milan for their use. Arianism maintained that the Son of God was created by the Father and was therefore neither co-eternal with the Father nor consubstantial. In another instance, when a pagan bloc of the legislators appealed to Emperor Valentinian II for a return to customary pagan observances, St. Ambrose responded in a letter to the emperor with sound arguments that effectively shut the pagans down. In 383, Ambrose was engaged to bargain with Maximus, who had commandeered power in Gaul and was preparing to invade Italy. St. Ambrose was successful in dissuading Maximus from marching south. When Ambrose was asked to negotiate again 3 years later, his advice to his superiors was ignored. Maximus invaded Italy and conquered Milan. St. Ambrose stayed in the city and assisted the populace. St. Ambrose frequently helped the poor, secured pardons for the condemned, and denounced the social injustices in his sermons. He was always happy to educate people interested in becoming baptized. He recurrently disapproved of municipal figures, and he advocated chastity to such an extent that parents of marriageable young women hesitated to let their daughters attend his sermons for fear they would take the veil. St. Ambrose was extremely admired as bishop, and on the occasions when he butted heads with regal authority, it was this popularity that kept him from suffering unfairly. He studied theology with Simpleton, a presbyter of Rome. He knew Greek and used this knowledge to study the Old Testament and Greek authors like Philo, Origen, St. Athanasius, and St. Basil of Caesarea, with whom he was also exchanging letters. He applied this knowledge as preacher, concentrating especially on the exegesis of the Old Testament, and his rhetorical abilities impressed St. Augustine of Hippo, who thought poorly of Christian preachers. On April 4, 397, St. Ambrose died. Now that we have an understanding of who St. Ambrose of Milan was, we take a look at what he had to say about Mary, who was without sin.
Mary's life should be for you a practical image of virginity. Her life is like a mirror reflecting the face of chastity and the form of virtue. Therein you may find a model for your own life, showing what to improve, what to imitate, what to hold fast to. She was a virgin not only in body but also in mind, who stained the sincerity of its disposition by no guile, who was humble in heart, grave in speech, prudent in mind, sparing of words, studious in reading, resting her hope not on uncertain riches, but on the prayer of the poor, intent on work, modest in discourse, wants to seek not man but God as the judge of her thoughts, to injure no one, to have good will towards all, to rise up before her elders, not to envy her equals, to avoid boastfulness, to follow reason, to love virtue. When did she pain her parents, even by a look? When did she disagree with her neighbors? When did she despise the lowly? When did she avoid the needy? Come then, and search out your sheep, not through your servants or hired men, but do it yourself. Lift me up bodily and in the flesh, which is fallen in Adam. Lift me up not from Sarah, but from Mary, a virgin not only undefiled, but a virgin whom grace had made inviolate, free of every stain of sin.
Well, that's all for this episode. Thank you for tuning in to Wisdom of the Fathers, and make sure to catch us next season, where we bring you a slew of new lessons. I'm Russ Voris, Michael's father. Thank you for tuning in, and God bless.